Welcome to the Success Showcase. I'm your host, Eric Lopkin from the Modern Observer Group. With me, as always, is Chip Janiszewski from the Hapoiness GPS. Chip, how are you doing this week?
Doing great. How about you?
I'm doing fantastic. Well, for today's episode, we're going to take a look at a business classic and one that has lessons that apply not just to business, but to everyday life. And as we were talking before we went on the air, something that we think is very appropriate now. It's the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. Now, this long been a classic, but it still has lessons that we can all learn from. Isn't that right, Chip?
Absolutely. If everybody in the world read this book and practiced it, there would absolutely be no problems in the world. I know that that's a really, really broad statement, but it is absolutely true. On the cover, it says, the only book you need to lead you to success, but the bottom line is that there's two ways to react to everything, and if you're reacting from the positive standpoint and really caring about the person that you're dealing with, it goes a whole lot farther than criticizing and judging and pointing fingers and so on and so forth. So it's just so important. And one of the biggest words in the title of the book is win friends, but the word influence is so important. The bottom line is you cannot change other people unless they want to be changed. However, you can influence people just by the way that you act with them and around them and become perceived as. And if you are an influence to people, they may not want to be like you today or want to be with you today. But if you're influencing them, eventually they may come around and say, I want some of that. And that's the way they get to wanting to change themselves. So that word is really so important. And it's really a theme of the book.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, the basis of the book is interpersonal relationships. And that's so important because learning communications, learning operations, all these other things, yes, they help, but everything we do is about relating to other people. None of us is an island. So this book goes a long way to helping us with that most basic part.
Yeah, it's really a tutorial, and it's really a lot of it is just aha moments. You know, I talk about blinding flashes of the obvious. This is not rocket science, and it's really developed. There's 4 different parts to the book, and each part has different sayings and things that you hit a chapter about different things. So the 4 parts of the book in handling people, number 1 is just fundamental techniques in handling people. Part 2 is 6 ways to make people like you. Part 3 is win people to your way of thinking. This is the influence part of it. And then part 4 is to be a leader, how to change people without giving offense or arousing resentment. A leader's job often includes changing your people's attitudes and behavior. And it talks about suggestions to do that. And really, in the workplace, this is so important. And parts of it are approaching, your employees or coworkers with a compliment first before you maybe talk about something that needs to be corrected instead of pointing out you messed up here, that kind of thing. So we both have a cheat sheet here because really the table of contents is perfect because it talks about everything that's in there and it's got the one lines on everything. So part 1, the fundamentals, techniques in handling people, are what I call the throwouts when I'm teaching how to maintain a positive mindset. And the throwouts are don't criticize people, condemn people, or complain. And then number 2 is the gratitude sides of things, just giving honest and sincere appreciation. And then the third one is arouse in the other person an eager want. We talk about the psychology of a buyer, and when you're working in business, with banks and other places that have to go out and they have their quotas of calls and whatever to sell. Bottom line is people are turned off by cold calls, and people buy for 2 reasons. Number 1 is for personal need or security, which is like food and insurance policies and so on and so forth, comfort stuff. And then number 2 is because I want it now. So it's very, very unlikely that somebody making a cold call saying this is what I do is going to incite somebody to buy something unless they need that or they want it at that point in time. And so
Right.
the most important thing to get people going is to develop the relationships with them first so that when they need or want something, they know you're there, and that's when they'll approach you. So this book is such a great tool in really training organizations to kind of change their approach in business development to go relationships first. And then once you have the relationship, then the person you're talking to is going to be interested in what you're doing and what you can offer.
Right. People always buy on their own schedule, not yours. So even though you want to sell, they may not be ready to buy. And this puts that in an important context. But I want to go back to the first 2 points, though, because they both revolve around being positive. Now, this is something we've talked about before, but people respond better to positive feedback than to negative feedback. Even if you're suggesting a change, doing so in a positive manner rather than criticizing is so important because people are more receptive to that.
Yeah, people automatically go on the defensive when they are approached in a negative manner. It's just human nature. And so it's so important to do that. And so obviously the best way is not to go up to them in a critical or condemning or complaining attitude, and to really, really appreciate the people that you're dealing with, not just like a brush over thing before you get to the pow that, you know, you're going to change or something like that. It really has to be said, give honest and sincere appreciation. And number 3 is arousing the person in eager want. And again, that's the function of first developing the relationship and then talking about things where they make the idea their own before you even get to it. And that gets them to the point of, I want it now. So this is kind of what this whole book is all about. That's the first influence principle in there, is arousing in the other person an eager want.
Right, and that's not something that's done quickly. It requires building a long-term relationship. And that's something that is very important to note about almost everything in this book. It's not sledgehammer tactics. Everything is very subtle. And when you're working with other people, it's about the long term. It's not about a quick gain. And most people, especially when dealing with customers, they tend to forget that. They focus on the sale. But there's a difference between a sale and a customer. A sale is a one-time thing, and then the customer's gone. But a customer can come back time and time again because you have a relationship with them. And this is how, to start building that.
Yeah, and beyond being a customer, that customer can also become a resource for you for future sales, because if the customer likes dealing with you, they are going to become your word-of-mouth sales force and talk about you to other people when the need arises for your products and services. It's just automatic that that's going to happen. So it goes far beyond people buying from you. And resources are so much more important because they just pay back over and over and over again.
That's very true. And you never know where these resources are going to come from. I had owned a business prior to my current company that I had a retail business selling collectibles, and I worked at shows. And I was at one show, and there was this kid looking at an action figure. And it wasn't a simple toy action figure. It was a high-end collectible, so it was fairly expensive. And he kept coming back through the entire show just looking at it. And I knew he didn't have the money for it. But he kept coming back and kept coming back. The end of the show, he comes back and finally asks how much it is. And I tell him what the price is, and of course he can't afford it. But I asked him, what are you allowed to spend? And he said it was like $6. So I said, I'll tell you what, I'll give it to you for $4. And I sold him the action figure, basically at below my cost. Thinking, all right, the kid has the action figure. It's one less thing I have to pack up. Well, the kid's father came over, and he was very appreciative of the fact that I let his son have this for so little. Over the following months, his father bought almost $1,000 of merchandise from us just because we had done this for his son.
Wow.
So you never know where that resource is going to come from.
Yep, and it was just an unconditional act of kindness on your part. And unconditional being the key word. You felt for this person, and you wanted him to have it as bad as he wanted it, and it's just it's fantastic. So you would have walked away feeling great either way, but that's just the fact that the father came back is a bonus.
And again, I didn't know he was going to come back because he came back at future shows. So it wasn't even, right away. It happened over time. And I mean, it was fantastic, to get that, but that obviously wasn't the reason. It was not expected. But that's what happens. I mean, when you put out into the universe that, that goodwill, it comes back.
Yep, absolutely. And this is a perfect segue into part 2. Part 1, again, that we just talked about was the fundamental techniques in handling people. But part 2 is 6 ways to make people like you. And number 1 is exactly what you did to that child. You became genuinely interested in him. You smiled at him, and that made the whole situation comfortable. And then it also talks about remembering that a person's name is to that person the sweetest and most important sound in any language. And it's a really, really good networking tip to repeat somebody's name when you first meet them a couple of times too, which will get them interested in liking you. But for at least from my standpoint, it helps me to remember the person because I'm horrible with names.
Absolutely. The more often you use it, the easier it is for you to remember it.
Yep. So, and then other tips, obviously, is to be a good listener, encourage others to talk about themselves. And a really easy way to do this when we talk networking is just to walk up and introduce yourself and say, hello, so-and-so, what do you do? Most times when you're in a networking event, somebody's wearing a name tag, and if you just call them by name and ask them what they do, they're going to be talking. And then if you're listening to them, it's so important to...
Yeah, it's very important to listen to people. Remember, talking is a part of a conversation. You need to listen as much as talk. And that's so important when building a long-term relationship. It's a two-way street. Chip, I think I lost you there for a minute. Are you there?
No, yeah, I'm usually talking on my cell phone, but I'm taking your advice and using a landline to talk on this thing, and there's some I think, crank phone call because I saw a weird caller ID that was just beeping me in the background, but they are gone. So okay. I'm going to send them a copy of the book if they call back.
There you go.
But other things that we're talking about in the 6 ways to make people like you. Number 5 is talk in terms of the other person's interests. And that's what you did again with that child. You were talking about the action figure and so on and so forth. And number 6 is to make him feel important and to do it sincerely. And when you were saying, what's your budget and so on and so forth, negotiated with him, I'm sure he walked out feeling on top of the world. So it's really part 1 and part 2 are they're just fundamental techniques in dealing with people and making them like you. And then 3 and 4 are kind of the influential side of things, winning people to your way of thinking and then becoming a wonderful leader.
That's it. And remember, influencing doesn't necessarily mean changing someone's mind. Simply having them be open to other points of view is a form of influence, and it's very important because the more you're open to, the more opportunities you can find, the more people you can connect to. When you close off what you're thinking because of a point of view, you're blocking off, a lot of opportunity, a lot of people. You want to be open to these things.
Absolutely. So, and suggesting is one form of influence, but very mildly suggesting and getting people, it's not arousing and eager wanting people, and it's just saying stuff that turns people on and makes them excited about different things. So, part 3, winning people to your way of thinking. Number 1, which is really probably the most important point of all, is the only way to get the best of an argument is to avoid it.
Right.
There really are no winners in an argument. Even if you get your way, do you ever walk away feeling good because you got your way? No way. And the bottom line is you're putting somebody else on the defensive.
It's never a good idea to be involved in an argument. And in fact, I was told a great trick for avoiding arguments was when somebody disagrees with you, simply say to them, you may be correct. I'll have to look into that. They can't argue with that because you're telling them there's a possibility they're correct. You're diffusing it by saying, well, I'm going to look into it. You're not saying you agree with them, but you're indicating you're open to it. Now,
absolutely. A couple points in here are try to honestly see things first from the other person's point of view,
right.
Whether you agree with it or not. I mean, the bottom line, everybody's opinion is right in their mind.
That's it. And it's very important, when you tell someone you're wrong, the first thing they're going to say is, no, I'm not. It's a defensive reaction. It happens all the time. It's human instinct. So by being open to their point of view, you allow the possibility for discussion.
Absolutely. And then another point is sometimes when you are open to discussion, you are going to realize every once in a while that you're wrong.
Right.
And one of the points here says if you are wrong, admit that quickly and emphatically. And if you do that to the other person that you're talking to, you've not only turned a potential argument into being able to get along, but you very, very much impressed them just by being totally open and to what they're doing. If you are able to admit that you're wrong and admit that quickly, that goes worlds in getting people to like you and to trust you and to know that you're a genuine person.
Oh, certainly. I mean, one of the few people I have ever acquiesced to block on Facebook over an argument was he was telling me his point of view, and I said, well, convince me, show me your facts, what are you basing this on? Because I don't really care, I base my point of view on the facts I have at the time. If someone has better facts, I'm all for learning them. But when I told him, well, show me your facts, his response was, well, I'm right, so I don't need facts. Well, that tells me you didn't really form an opinion based on anything. So there's really nothing to discuss because you don't actually have a point of view that you can back up. There should always be a reason that you have a point of view. And you should, if you can't share that with someone, maybe you need to listen to somebody else's point of view and give theirs a shot.
Maybe you should go online and buy this book.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, but it talks about being sympathetic with the other person's ideas and desires and so on and so forth, appealing to nobler motives. Get the other person saying yes, yes immediately, even if you're trying to discuss things that you may be disagreeing on. If you can bring up some points and whatever, trying to understand things, the word yes is a very, very powerful word if it's coming out of both of your mouths when you're dealing with each other.
And that's very important because even if you end up not agreeing, if you can agree on points, if not the entire thing, that goes a long way to showing, okay, we have different opinions, but, we're looking at it either for different things or we agree on parts of it. And it allows people to separate the disagreement of a point of view from the relationship itself. Especially now, too many people will get into a disagreement and they go, well, that's it. I can't speak to you anymore. I'm done with you. The relationship has to be bigger than any one disagreement.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And again, it's just so important to really, really be open and being listening to people, whether you agree with them or not. As I said, you're not going to be able to change people, but the influence side of things will be able to get you folks out there into a synergizing situation. So, we were just talking about winning people over to your way of thinking, and then culminating everything is to be a leader. And again, it's how to change people without giving offense or arousing resentment. A leader's job often includes changing your people's attitudes and behavior. And here are some of the suggestions as to how to accomplish this. Number one, which is so important, is beginning with praise and honest appreciation before anything else. And then that allows you to call attention to people's mistakes indirectly after starting out with sincere and honest appreciation. And I'm sure that both of us have run into this many, many times in our lives, both ways around, where we didn't start with that and maybe we were victims of it the other way around, or when people did that.
That was actually something I had learned when I was in corporate, when I had to do employee evaluations. I was taught to do the evaluation. The first thing you do is compliment someone on what they do well. Then you bring up something that they might need help changing or that they need improvement on, and then bring up something else they do well. This way, they understand, okay, yes, there was that one thing, but everything else is overwhelmingly positive.
Yep, it's simple perspective. If you have a positive perspective, you can really get away with, talking about things and correcting. And they're going to want to correct things. If they know that you appreciate them, they're going to want to correct things. And, point number 3 kind of goes along with admitting that you're wrong to avoid an argument. And this is talking about your own mistakes before criticizing the other people. If you can talk about that, especially if you are technically above the other person as far as the boss or something like that, they will realize that you're very human and make mistakes also, and that you appreciate the fact that they are also.
Absolutely. When I had a staff, often I would see somebody doing something, and rather than just telling them they're doing it wrong, I would actually say to them, oh, no, I tried doing it that way. It didn't work out so well. Let me show you what I found worked better. Because that way they knew I made the same choice they did, and I'm only telling them it didn't work out after I failed at it.
Yeah, I mean, you're actually teaching them and supporting them rather than saying, do it this way.
Right.
You're letting the other person save face, which is really, really important.
That's it. It's very important that you be able to put yourself in the other person's shoes. You have to try to understand where they're coming from. Then, if you have something you can tell them to improve what they're doing, phrase it as a suggestion, not a command. You can't tell them, well, that's wrong, do it this way. That, it's going to get their hackles up. Well, don't tell me it's wrong. But instead, if you can suggest a way to get a better result for everybody, most people are much more open to that.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the tougher ones that I see here, which takes some practice and some studying before you know you're going to be sitting down with your employer or whatever. But it says ask questions instead of giving direct orders. So,
right.
What that means is just a great way to get them to your way of thinking is to ask questions and to get them say yes, yes, and so on and so forth, and it kind of influences them towards your way of thinking. So,
absolutely. I actually learned that one of my corporate jobs was I ran a publication for Reuters, for a division of Reuters. And the main goal of that division was to sell research reports. Well, the newsletter that I published talked about these research reports. And every once in a while, the report was just way off. And I'm referring to stock research reports. So, and stock analysts would make their recommendation, and our finance people would take a look at this and go, well, there's no way this is justified. However, because the division was trying to sell the report, we were told point blank, we cannot say that the report is wrong. We are not allowed to do that. So we actually developed this method of writing articles where we would take the reader point by point through the report and let the reader figure out that the report was wrong rather than coming out and saying it.
Wow. That's pretty interesting.
But we found it does work a lot better, because when you tell somebody, well, this is wrong, well, you say it's wrong. Maybe it's not. But when you take them through it point by point and allow them to come to the conclusion on their own, they figured it out regardless of what you're saying. So it works a lot better, and it avoids conflict because, again, you're not telling them something, you're letting them discover it on their own.
Right. And that's obviously it's human nature to want to be able to see things before you're doing it. And if you can make it their own first, it just goes so much farther. So
Absolutely.
And it all goes into point number 5 here under part 4, which is letting the other person save face. And then the next few points here are really about emphasizing the positive. Number 6 here says, praise the slightest improvement and praise every improvement. Be hearty in your approbation and lavish in your praise, as opposed to you messed up again. It's so important. And then to go along with that, after lavishing them with praise, what you're actually doing is you're working point number 7 here, which is giving the other person a fine reputation to live up to. Talk about influence.
And that's very important, because I have often found if you expect the best out of somebody, they will give it to you. If you expect the worst out of someone, they'll give you that too. They're going to live up to whatever they think, your thought process is. If you don't think they're capable of doing anything right, they're going to prove you're right and just not put any effort in. But if you give them the impression that you believe they are capable of great things, they'll live up to it and they'll actually produce great things.
And they'll have a ball doing it.
Yes.
Which that's what it's all about. So, it talks about using encouragement, make faults easy to correct, and just making the other people happy about doing the things that you suggest. It's all everything we talked about today. It's not rocket science. I'm sure all of you are out there saying, "Oh yeah, this is absolutely the way that if we did all act this way, then things would be better at work, things would be better in our personal lives, and the world would be just a much, much better place." So.
And of course, it does require practice. I mean, it's great to read the book, and I recommend reading it multiple times and trying to internalize it. But it does really take practice, because our human nature does sort of push our ego. We're very quick as a people to criticize each other, to defend ourselves. And it takes a lot of work to sort of stop yourself from doing that on a knee-jerk reaction, thinking back to the book and going, oh, wait a minute, there's a better way, let me try this. And it takes practice before it becomes second nature.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And one of the best things in this book is to I think there's a page in there that has all these points on there, and you can probably download it from the web. But if you just print out that table of contents, this is a one-page thing that lists all of these different things that we talked about, and there's about 25 or 30 of them, just one-liners, where you can highlight the ones you need to work on, and if you have that one page in front of you at all times, it will help you out a whole lot as far as mastering the techniques that this book teaches you.
Yes, and something you can do, which I recommend, is if you have the printout of that one page, read that page every day, because that'll memorize it, internalize it, make it part of you. That way, when you're going about your day and you're dealing with people, you've got this stuff in your head, and that's the first step to actually implementing it well. Again, that's always the difficult. It's really easy to read and plan. To implement it, that's the part that takes work. That's what we all have to struggle with.
Absolutely. And what I might recommend to you folks out there who are in management and have teams is to go out and get this book and go over all these things together. It's an amazing team-building exercise, which I saw firsthand when I was doing my workshop this week.
We're just about out of time. So, Chip, what would you think is the one takeaway that you really want people to take from this book?
The takeaway should just be getting a copy of the book itself. And again, just genuinely liking people, seeing their point of view, and appreciating what they do.
Yeah, I think the big takeaway is it really comes down to a phrase we've heard over and over again: do unto others as you wish others would do to you. treat people the way you want to be treated. And if it's something that you would never want to happen to you, don't do it to someone else.
Absolutely.
You've been listening to the Success Showcase. I am your host, Eric Lopkin, and you can listen to us every week at blogtalkradio.com/Success Showcase. You can also find us on the iTunes Store or the Apple Podcasts app. And you can go to Facebook and like the Success Showcase there. We hope to see you there, and we look forward to your tuning in again. Have a great week.